The snow fell heavy on the crimson peaks the day Marcus Thorne arrived at the cave. His armor was tarnished, his sword chipped from 100 battles, and the brand of exile burned dark on his left shoulder, a mark that declared him worthy of neither home nor honor. He had climbed for 3 days without food, driven only by the stubbornness that had gotten him exiled in the first place. When he'd refused Lord Caldris's order to massacre the village of Thornhaven, he'd known the consequences. A warrior who disobeyed was worse than useless. He was dangerous. The cave entrance loomed before him like a granite throat, and Marcus stumbled inside seeking only shelter from the storm. He expected emptiness, perhaps a bear he'd have to fight. What he found instead stopped him in his tracks. Eggs. 3 of them, each the size of a barrel, their shells shimmering with an iridescent sheen that seemed to hold captured starlight. They were arranged in a crude nest of grass and branches, and even from the entrance Marcus could feel the warmth radiating from them. Dragon eggs. Marcus had seen dragons twice in his 40 years. Once as a boy when a great worm had passed overhead like a comet of scales and fury. Once as a soldier, when his battalion had watched from a safe distance as 2 dragons fought over territorial rights, their battle reshaping the landscape. Dragons were myths made flesh, older than kingdoms, powerful beyond reckoning, and these eggs were unguarded. Marcus knew he should leave. Dragon mothers were notoriously protective, and he had no desire to die as char and ash. But as he turned to go, he heard them, voices echoing up the mountain path, harsh and eager. Tracker says the nest is near here. 3 eggs will make us richer than kings. Move faster, you fools. Before the mother returns, poachers. Marcus recognized their kind, men who dealt in rare treasures for wealthy collectors who cared nothing for consequences. Dragon eggs were worth fortunes in the underground markets of the southern cities. They were also a death sentence for anyone caught with them, but greed made men stupid. Marcus looked at the eggs, then at the cave entrance. Every logical thought told him to slip out the back, to let the poachers take what they wanted. He was exiled, branded dishonored. He owed nothing to anyone, least of all to creatures that would probably incinerate him on sight. But as he stared at those shimmering shells, Marcus remembered something his father had told him before the old man died. Honor isn't what others say about you, boy. It's what you know about yourself when you're alone in the dark. Marcus drew his chipped sword and positioned himself in the narrow cave entrance. The poachers arrived minutes later, 7 of them armed with crossbows and nets and the kind of cruel confidence that came from hunting things that couldn't fight back. Their leader, a scarred man with gold teeth, saw Marcus and laughed. "Step aside, exile," the man said, eyeing the brand on Marcus's shoulder. "You've got no stake in this." "The eggs stay," Marcus replied quietly. "You're 1 man with a broken sword. We're 7 with fresh steel. Do the math." Marcus smiled without humor. "I was never good at math." They came at him all at once, which was their first mistake. The cave entrance was narrow enough that only 2 could fight at a time, and Marcus had spent 20 years learning how to make small spaces his advantage. His sword might have been chipped, but his skill was sharp as ever. The first poacher fell with a blade through his throat. The second lost his hand reaching for a net. The third managed to fire a crossbow bolt that buried itself in Marcus's shoulder. But the exiled warrior barely flinched. Pain was an old companion. They fought for what felt like hours, but was likely only minutes. Marcus's world narrowed to the dance of steel and survival, to protecting the narrow passage behind him. Blood slicked the stone, his and theirs. His movements grew slower, heavier. A sword caught him across the ribs. Another opened his thigh, but he didn't fall. Couldn't fall. Behind him were 3 innocent lives waiting to be born, and some things were worth dying for even if you'd lost everything else. The gold-toothed leader finally rushed him in desperation, and Marcus caught the man's blade with his own, twisted and drove his pommel into the poacher's skull. The man dropped like a stone. Marcus collapsed against the cave wall, his blood pooling beneath him. 4 poachers dead, 3 fled. The eggs were safe. He could hear his heartbeat slowing, feel the cold creeping in despite the warmth of the eggs. Marcus Thorne, exiled warrior, dishonored soldier, would die in an unnamed cave on a forgotten mountain. No songs would be sung. No one would mourn. But the eggs were safe. As darkness closed around him, Marcus felt something warm press against his hand. He forced his eyes open and saw, impossibly, a crack forming in the nearest egg. A tiny snout emerged, scales the color of burnished copper, eyes like molten gold. The hatchling crawled toward him, chirping softly and curled against his cooling palm. The last thing Marcus Thorne felt was that small, warm weight, and he died with something like peace in his heart. The mother dragon returned an hour later, her wings blotting out the sun. She saw the carnage, the dead poachers and the exiled warriors slumped against her nest. She saw the hatchling curled against his hand, already bonded to the warmth she sensed in his dying moments. Dragons understood warmth, not the heat of fire, but the warmth of sacrifice, of honor, of choosing to protect the helpless when doing so gained you nothing. She lifted Marcus's body gently in her claws and flew to the highest peak of the Crimson Mountains. There, she laid him in a tomb of white stone that she carved with her own claws, and she breathed upon it until the stone melted and reformed into something eternal. When her hatchlings were old enough to fly, she brought them to that place and told them the story. And they told their hatchlings. And so it spread. Within a generation, every dragon in the world knew of Marcus Thorne, the exile who had given everything to protect eggs that weren't his own. They carried his story across kingdoms, whispered it to worthy humans, etched it into stone in their ancient script. Kings and heroes came to pay homage at his tomb. Poets wrote ballads that spread like wildfire. Children were named in his honor. The very land where he died became sacred ground, protected by dragons who would suffer no harm to come to it. Lord Caldrus, who had ordered the exile, found his name forgotten within a decade. But Marcus Thorne became legend, because dragons never forget warmth, and they never let the world forget those who possess it. In the Crimson Peaks, where snow falls eternal and dragons wheel through clouds like living stars, there stands a tomb of white stone. Carved upon it in both human letters and draconic script are simple words. Here lies Marcus Thorne, exiled by men, honored by dragons. He chose right over easy and death over dishonor. May all who read this know, true honor needs no crown. And on cold nights, when the wind howls through the peaks, some say you can still see dragons landing at that tomb, bringing offerings of gold and gems and precious things, not because Marcus would have wanted such treasures, but because it's all dragons know to give, and they owe a debt that can never truly be repaid. After all, he gave them their children, and dragons never forget.